I am, in fact, very much delighted to be back. I want to give a little bit of sort of a preview of what's coming for the next couple of days, and also what I think is ahead for not just Code for America, but what I consider to be the larger community, and dare I say, the movement. David and I have similar ways of starting talks, so it'll be a little bit repetitive, but why are we here together? We're here because all of us, no matter what we do, I think believe this statement. Government can work for the people, by the people in the 21st century. And unfortunately, there are too many people who are not even good after the first 3 words of that. We need to prove them wrong. I think we can prove them wrong. We do prove them wrong, and we'll do that over the next couple of days. But we also have a particular take on this, which is that it only happens if we make it so. We're here not just because we believe that, plenty of people believe that, but we're here because we each take action in our own ways to make that true. That's the bond that we have, the bond that we're celebrating. There's a bunch of us here, about a third of you in the audience, maybe it's a little bit more than a third, work in government. And one thing that I would like to always be true here at the Code for America Summit is that this is a place where you are thanked for your public service. Remember that the people here understand the sacrifices that you make every day and appreciate the work that you do, and I hope that will always be true. Most of you, of course, are in local government. We also have a bunch of folks from the federal government here, many of them people I worked with them last year. A little shout out to all of you guys there. And of course, we want to honor everybody who works in government. There's going to be a particular shout-outs this week, obviously, to the folks in government who have welcomed fellows into their city in this past year, the 10 cities that you're going to be hearing from. Thank you very much. It's a brave move to welcome them in. And also to government partners who are opening their doors at City Hall to volunteer brigades all over the country and letting them work collaboratively and cooperatively. Thank you for that. We also have a number of elected officials that are present here today, and I'd like to thank them for being here. It's an honor. Vallejo's mayor, Osby David, is here. From West Sacramento, we've got Mayor Christopher Calbadon, and the Yolo County Board of Supervisors, Don Saylor. Yolo! We have from Pittsburgh, Councilwoman Natalia Rudiak, and I believe Mayor Peduto will be showing up later in the week. From Miami-Dade County, Mayor Carlos Jimenez. Albuquerque Mayor, thank you. I'm sorry. We should not go so fast. Albuquerque Mayor Richard Berry is here. And we've got Somerville's Mayor Joe Curtatone. So thank you guys so much for being here. It's an honor. A great honor that you've chosen to spend this time with us. So we're very excited to have you. And for those of you in the audience, you may, when we make an announcement later in the day, you may find a little bit of a pattern to the mayors that are here and some of the work that's going to be happening in the future. Others of you are here who don't work in government, and some of you would represent what we call the people. I would say a lot of you that fall into that category, whether you're geeks or not, are people who could have chosen the internet as your country, who could have said, that is the jurisdiction I will make myself subject to. And I want to honor the fact that you have all said, no, I think that the real communities that I live and work in, and those others around the world and around the country, actually matter, and I want to help make those work better. Of course, all of us here, whether we work in government, represent the people. We are all citizens no matter what we do. We will honor all of you in your roles as citizens, but again, we want to give a particular shout out to those brigade members who have, once again, they've gotten behind on their Game of Thrones episodes because they've been going to City Hall and working on standing up an answers platform or advocating for open data. And again, the fellows who've done a whole year of service in those 10 cities, we want to give them a big thank you. There's a third group that we haven't specifically called out before at Code for America, and it's the companies that work with government. Of course, there's many different companies here. We want to talk about this because if you go back to that mission statement, if we're going to make government work for the people, by the people in the 21st century, there are really three major stakeholder groups that have to come to the table with something significantly different than they are today in order for that to be true. And of course, that's the people. Of course, that's government. But the vendor ecosystem also needs to change. And so we want to give a shout out not just to the companies that are in our current class of the Accelerator that are here, those 5 wonderful companies. You'll be hearing from them and seeing them at the Civic Tech Fair. All of the companies that have gone through the Accelerator program and as well as our incubator program that's created companies out of Code for America Fellowship projects. But all of the companies, including the amazing sponsors, who I will not repeat since David just did it, but thank you. They, of course, make this event possible. And there's many other companies that have been in this from the beginning, companies like Open Plans that we've partnered with from day one, or Case Commons, or new entrants like Ad Hoc and Una Health who are working at the federal level. But we want to recognize them as well. Now, most conferences that you will go to, people will say this is a sort of a gathering of the tribe. I would say this is a gathering of multiple tribes. We are coming from different spaces, but we're coming together for this week. And that's important because we can do so much more because we're coming from these separate spaces. And it's important that we do more because there is so much more to do. What we plan to do in the next 3 days is, of course, celebrate not just Code for America projects, but what everybody here has done and how this whole movement is moving forward and working on deeper and harder projects, and welcome new people into this space, into this community in an inclusive way. And the third thing we do, of course, is say, okay, now that we've made this progress, what's the bar that we want to set for the coming year or even the coming 5 years? How do we want to congratulate ourselves and then try to do something even bigger? There is an enormous amount to celebrate, and I will just point to one small thing. Since we have been very focused on opening data here in this community, we're now tracking with Sunlight and Open Knowledge Foundation through a census of the cities that have opened their data. This obviously goes way, way, way down. The screenshot stopped at 6. But so many more cities are opening their data, and not just doing it for greater transparency, or greater accountability, but because they're seeing those generative effects when people can actually use that data and make it available and relevant and meaningful to citizens in their lives. And we'll talk about many, many examples of that. But when we talk about setting the bar, I think it's important to realize that in the past year, the bar has been also set for us to a degree. A year ago, we were here. This is the same stage, just the little 13 instead of the 14. Same wonderful MSC. Do you remember what it was like? If those of you who were here last year, do you remember what was going on? Government was shut down, or the federal government was shut down. Now, in cities, people still had their garbage picked up. Cities were still functioning, thank goodness. Yay, local government. Healthcaregov was in its, third week of not functioning. And when things like that happen, though all of you in local government kept your cities running just fine, there is still a break in trust and faith between citizens and government when something like that happens. And it helps set that bar for us in a way that we should be very cognizant of. There's a lot of talk of sort of the drama of Healthcaregov, and we're going to cover that in a panel later today. But I think the thing that helps us understand our context for the coming week is that it wasn't just the president's key policy initiative that failed. It was that the American people, whether we like it or not, realized that we have a much bigger problem. If we can't implement the policies we make, we can't govern. And I think that creates a real anxiety that it's our job to fix. It's our job to show that that is possible. We can actually implement these policies, but we need to prove that we can. It wasn't just that sort of anxiety. There was another turning point related to healthcare.gov that was very relevant to what was going on here in the Code for America world. And it was very well expressed by Ezra Klein in the Washington Post just after we were together last year. And he was talking about the fact that what the middle class, or largely the middle class, was going through, trying to sign up for healthcare through that site, was what we put poor people through every day when they have to deal with social services or the criminal justice system. And we found that observation very relevant, and if you were here last year, you'll remember, because we had just had fellows dealing with the experience of being poor in America. Tiana Wertheim with the City County of San Francisco was on stage with Jake Solomon and Mark Hebert talking about their experiences with the SNAP program, food stamps. Tiana had identified that there's an enormous churn in that program where people will sign up for it, but then they're dropped from the rolls and they have to re-sign up at great cost to both the program itself and the person who's trying to enroll. And Jake and Mark talked about the research that they did, and excuse me for those of you who were here last year, but many of you were not. The realization that they had that the real pain point was when you had your EBT card and you thought it had just been refilled and you went to the grocery store and got all your groceries and got all the way to the front of that checkout line at the grocery store, and then your EBT card didn't work. And it meant that you were going to go home hungry and that you were embarrassed of the people standing in the back in the line, and how important it was to fix problems like that. I don't think we can say that they have fixed the problem, but they certainly helped when they built Promptly, which allows you to just simply text message someone before they're about to drop off the rolls, instead of getting these very long, complicated notices in the mail, which many people don't get, that nobody really understood, including me. I read a number of them. You get a simple text message that tells you to call the office, and you can act and avoid that terrifying moment at the checkout stand. We also had the San Mateo team working with Beverly Johnson, also on access to food services and other social services that resulted in the Ohana API and the open referral standard that I hope you'll all dig into. And it wasn't, of course, just through that. We also had our teams working in the criminal justice system, which I'll talk about later. And at the end of last year, we had Mike Bracken from the Government Digital Service in the UK up here on stage. And of course, it was a little bit of an ironic time for him to be here, given that they have just been going through all of this in the UK. In fact, it was a failure in their healthcare system that prompted them starting that government digital service, which has had such a huge impact. But he had that great line at the end, in the middle of his talk last year. This isn't a policy option, it's a delivery crisis. And of course, that's what we were in and what we are in. And I think what Mike was seeing with his British eyes was that, if as a society we chose not to put the resources to feeding people who are hungry or getting people who are sick in front of a doctor or policing our communities, that would be one thing. But that's not what we're doing. We're putting enormous resources aside, but then we're dropping the ball on what we call implementation, because implementation in the 21st century is fundamentally linked to the digital. It's inextricably linked. And unfortunately, we have been treating digital as something that you can buy the same way that you buy pencils. This was another line from another talk that Mike did. And when we do that, it doesn't work. And when it doesn't work, we all have this experience of a mismatch between our values, when we think we the people, and the way that government is expressing those values. When you see those notices that people on SNAP are getting, you say, wait, that's not me. Those are my taxpayer dollars, but that's not how I want to communicate. That's not how I want this institution to communicate. It has a fundamental lack of respect, which is what Jake Solomon, one of the team that worked with Tiana in San Francisco last year, wrote about in his piece called People Not Data. If you haven't read this, please do. It's online, and it's also in Civic Quarterly, which most of you should have, the beautiful purple-covered print publication that the amazing Code for America Fellows put together this year that I hope will continue. He was talking about the way in which we deliver services, the design of them and the language of them fundamentally communicates a kind of disdain for the user. And that's not what we want, especially because we know that when you do it in a way that communicates respect in a way that's simpler and cleaner and simple, beautiful, and easy to use, it actually costs us less to communicate with people in a way that's fundamentally respectful. So that's one of the ways I think this bar has been set. We need to not just make services cheaper, we need to have them reflect our values. Another way that we are setting the bar here at Code for America is trying our best to articulate what we think the core capabilities are that that 21st century governments need to have. Now, we have gone back and forth on these about 1 million times. We've worked with a wonderful partner at Living Cities on developing a set of these. I think they are going to be articulating a broader set that's less focused on digital. But ultimately, we're talking about capabilities, about designing for and with people, listening to the community, not just in the traditional ways, but communication is different in the 21st century. If you want to include your whole community, you'll have to find other channels. Collaborating, not just with people in your community, but with each other, local governments collaborating to solve problems, and also through things like data standards. In the interest of time, I won't go into all of them, but we do invite you to comment on these, and particularly to give us examples of either where this is really working well for you, where you feel like your city is really growing this capability or has this capability solidly in the 21st century, or where there are barriers to doing that. And we know there are many barriers. That's what we're here to do, is work on those. If you go on the Code for America site right now, I believe there's a button that invites your feedback. But also tomorrow, after the Civic Tech Fair, in the same space as the Civic Tech Fair over there in the forum, we're going to have a wall, and we can do it old school style with sticky notes. We'd love you to help make this live and be much more rich than just a set of capabilities on a slide. It's not just the capabilities. We also, of course, when you think about the outcomes we're going for, when you think about that 40% reduction in churn on Snap because of the implementation of Promptly, the two are inextricable. If you're going to build the capability, you have to be focused on an outcome. And those two are not separate for us. We want your examples. Yes, we do. Thank you. So the other way that we're trying to set that bar a little higher for our organization is to try to take that fundamentally iterative, data-driven, and user-centered approach and apply it more intentionally to a select number of focus areas. This doesn't mean that we're not going to be working with a lot of different areas. It doesn't mean that the Code for America network will suddenly just work on these 3 topic areas. But if you've been following our work since we founded in 2011, we have done everything from transportation to blight to education. And we're finding that while all of those are exciting, and it's been very appropriate at the sort of early phases of this movement to show what's possible, we're starting to dip our toes into areas where we want to return. We want to go back and say, can we not just show that something is possible here, but follow that thread and have a deeper impact? And I think the best way for me to describe why we want to take this approach in the coming year is to tell a little bit of the story of how we came to get involved in one of those areas, that middle one, safety and justice. A couple of years ago, I got a call from Ann Milgram, who was on the stage last year as heads the criminal justice practice for the Arnold Foundation, and she wanted to know if Code for America could help us could help her bring to life this vision of moneyballing criminal justice. Of course, Moneyball refers to the movie where they're using smart statistics to make baseball better. But she thought, let's apply it to something perhaps more important, depending on how you feel about baseball, which is many, many different aspects of the criminal justice system that aren't using data now to make good decisions. And when she described to me that just one tiny example, that we're holding people pre-trial, often for very, very minor violations, when we don't need to, when there's not really a risk of them not showing up. And we're talking about thousands of people, even in just one jurisdiction. And then what she said to me, but it's not just that we're holding them and that costs money, but if somebody we're holding pre-trial has a job, what's happening to that job? If they have a family, what's happening to their family? She started to get at the bigger picture here and talk about the ways that there's this low-hanging fruit. If we could bring some data to bear on these decisions and make even just a few better decisions, it could have a really huge impact. And so we sent an email to a number of local governments in our network and said, would anyone like to work with us on this? And of course, if you were here last year, you know that we worked with both New York City and Louisville, Kentucky. This is the outcome of the Louisville engagement. Well, there were many outcomes, but one, the software outcome, a jail population management dashboard that's in use there, and I understand is now going to be rolled out in Denver and hopefully in other jurisdictions as well. And it was just, gave us a taste of this and got us very attuned to these issues in the criminal justice system. And because we were attuned to that, it really informed our thinking when we started talking in the office over the past couple of months about what the events in Ferguson mean to this space. There was a lot of angst around this at the office, a lot of outrage, and a lot of desire to figure out what would Code for America's reaction to something like that? What could we do? And Catherine Bracey said this very well, our director of community organizing, who many of you know. She said, what we're seeing in Ferguson is the inverse of the world Code for America imagines. So no trust in government, no meaningful way for the people to participate. And we had to talk about it. What would we do? And I think what the fellows and the staff came up with was, there's not that much we think sort of with some humility we could really do in Ferguson right now. I mean, sending a hackathon team there might be considered a somewhat disrespectful thing to do. But could we think about what would you do if you knew that that was going to happen 5 years before? Where would you intervene? What data would you be looking at so that we could prevent a Ferguson? And I had that in mind a couple of weeks later when the New York Times published this little chart of warrants issued per 1,000 people in 2013 in cities in Missouri. Warrants, by the way, as they put in the text here, are often served when someone fails to appear to pay fines for traffic or other violations, such as shoplifting, or disturbance of the peace. So these are not mostly violent crimes. These are people who probably didn't know that they were supposed to appear in court and were issued a bench warrant. There is, as you can see on the chart, there's a city in Missouri that had 1.5 bench warrants per person. Can you guess which city that was? That's Ferguson. And when I saw that, I thought, oh my God, these things that Anne has been telling me about the indicators of a lack of trust and faith in society, and what the fellows have been saying about the need to go work in these areas is really true. We're not going to be able, I don't think we're going to go to Ferguson anytime soon, but can we work more deeply in these areas to try to build that trust and faith, to look at these things that are low-hanging fruit, make our criminal justice system more just, and make our communities safer. And that's why we decided to go into that particular area, but that's just one of the three, and we'll be talking about the other two tomorrow. I'd like to remind us, of course, that we work on these projects, again, through the capabilities, through that core approach, but we do it because it's not just government working for the people, by the people. You can also think of it as government working for people, by people. These are real people who are ending up in jail when they don't need to be, and this is the work that we want to do.